Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. Today we're going to make a bag from a Dollar Tree bag. A long time ago, on a holiday far away, I was in a Disney park and there was a thunderstorm. I hurried into the nearest building, which was a shop, along with a lot of other soaking wet guests. And across the crowded room, I saw a bag, a beautiful bag. I later learned the price was astronomical. Not for me. But I kept thinking about the bag, and years later, I bought a tiny version on eBay. I love the vibrant colors, and I like the pattern, and I like the style of the bag, although it is very small. So we are not going to make a knockoff Dooney and Burke bag. I do not have that skill, but we're going to use that as inspiration to make a bag from a Dollar Tree vinyl bag. Let's go have some fun. For the top of the pocketbook, I wanted to do something unique. I love William Morris. These are some images of his art from the Victoria and Albert. I love particularly his wallpaper, which is intertwined leaves like this example acanthus. I decided to borrow from Beatrix Potter. Her art is in the public domain. This is an example of a search on Beatrix Potter, Peter Rabbit in Wikimedia, and I chose this image and brought it into Photoshop, and I took just this one leaf and then I repeated it at different orientations, and I used an artistic filter called Poster Edges, and I gave it a green background. This image has lines in it to show the size of the fabric that I'll be transferring the image to. I'm not going to say I love the art that I produced. It has a sort of Renaissance fresco turned into 1990s wallpaper border look to it. I chose to make it sort of symmetrical and to have space around it because I know that I'm going to need that space when I'm sewing. We're going to be using this Dollar Tree bag. It has straps for carrying it. It also has an over-the-shoulder strap. It has snaps on the inside. And for lining, I thought we would try this Dollar Tree scarf, which I've ironed. And I also have this upholstery fabric, which I had to buy on the bolt. So I have a lot of extra fabric, so I thought I would use it for this project. This is a prototype bag, so this is what I'm going to be making, something with side pockets and then a lining on the inside. This is much too large to make out of the Dollar Tree bag. I made a smaller prototype and same thing out of scrap fabric. This one happens to have a handle because I wanted to practice that as well. This is closer to what we'll be making. These are the measurements. And for the lining for the inside of the bag, I made a pattern out of tissue paper. Now for the bag itself, I realized that it would be easiest and it would give us the largest bag if we simply cut the bag in the middle and basically used the bottom of the bag as it is. So I've already done that with a bag, and I just laid it very flat and then trimmed it to size, and then I opened up the seams right down to the bottom on both sides. So we'll start by cutting the lining fabric, and I'm just going to measure and cut 2 9 by 11 inch squares. And then I will use the pattern to cut the lining for the inside of the bag. If you have fabric with the right side, you want to make sure the right sides are facing when you cut the pattern. This fabric is difficult to work with. Some of the other Dollar Tree scarves are a little bit of a thicker fabric, and I would recommend using those. Now that's the bag and the lining piece is cut, and the only thing left is to cut the fabric for the top of the bag, which is two 11 by 3 3/4 inch rectangles. So that's all of the pieces cut, the 2 pieces of plain fabric for the top of the bag itself, the pocket linings, and the lining for the inside of the bag. Now I am very concerned about sewing this fabric. It was difficult to cut, and you can see that it's very thin and it's fraying terribly. So what I decided to do was add some interfacing to it. And I just have this bag of random pieces of interfacing, and the one that I chose unfortunately doesn't have any instructions, but I chose this one because it's fusible only on one side and because it's very thin. So I fused that to one of my pocket lining pieces, and that went very well, so I decided to fuse it to the rest of the pieces. And I followed the instructions on one of the other pieces of interfacing. So I basically ironed the fabric down, and then I dampened it with a spray bottle and ironed it again. It's easiest to fuse first and then cut, and what I would recommend is to actually fuse the fabric before even trying to cut out the pattern. If I had realized I needed to do this step first, I would have done it in that order. After cutting the pieces out, I ironed them one more time. I then tidied the edges. For the top of the fabric, I chose to transfer my image to the fabric using Mod Podge. And I've done a video showing different techniques for transferring images to fabric and then sealing them, and I will include a link to that video. You first lay on a thick coat of Mod Podge. And then lay the image on the fabric with the Mod Podge down. Press the image firmly into the fabric. I'm using a popsicle stick here. And then you wait 24 hours for it to dry completely. Once it has dried completely, dampen the paper with a sponge that is wet with cool water, and then continue to rub the sponge over the paper until all of the paper has been removed. Wait for it to dry again. I decided to use a vinyl mat fusing on the fabric with the transferred images. They are completely dry now. And I'd like to say that this is what I wanted them to look like, but it isn't. They did not transfer perfectly. There are places where the image didn't transfer, and so I would recommend, if you were going to do this, to transfer an image that is larger than the image that you want to use, since it seems to transfer particularly badly at the edges. So I'm just going to measure out the vinyl product in the correct size and cut it. And once I have the vinyl in the correct size, I set my iron to a medium temperature setting and I peel the vinyl off of the backing. But you lay it tacky side down on the fabric. Then you use the paper backing as a press cloth and you press it down with your iron. The instructions say 8 seconds for each area. You then turn the fabric over so that the vinyl side is down and you iron the back of the fabric. I'm going to use all 3 straps. I'm going to need all 3 pieces to make a crossbody bag. And I purchased these rings from Amazon, but there are alternatives to these rings at Dollar Tree. For example, in the pet section there are these leashes that have both D-rings and buckles. And there are harnesses that have 5 D-rings on each harness. In the electronics section, there's a phone ring with strap that has a very nice gold ring on it. And in the hair accessories section, there are these barrettes. Any of these options would work for hardware, or you could purchase hardware at a craft store, or you could make the bag with no hardware. And I'm just going to rip the seams on the long crossbody handle to remove it. Now with that removed, notice that it's finished only on one side. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half and sew it together so that it's finished on both sides like the other handles. The other handles will actually just pop right off the bag if I pull them. Now I just want to match the seams on the finished handles, so I'm just figuring out where that seam is and then I'm going to sew similar seams on the long crossbody piece. And I've looped each end over a ring, and I'm just going to stitch that down. I decided to sew a second seam on each of those just to make them a little tidier looking. Now I'm trying to select a thread that will match this scarf from the Dollar Tree that I'm using as a lining. I have this one, 15 cents. I think that belonged to my grandmother. It doesn't match. I just picked all the greenish colored threads. This is a weird one. I have 2 different threads on there. I have no idea how that happened. But that actually happens to be the best match of all the threads that I have. So that's the winner. And now with the inner lining, we're going to sew straight down the sides. And then we're going to sew just a little over an inch on each side on the bottom. We're going to leave an opening at the bottom, and that's going to be used to turn the bag once we put the whole bag together. Okay, now those little corners, we're going to match them to each other. So a little bit of origami here, just pull, and then you're going to sort of flatten it out and sew it. You get a nice little corner at the bottom of each edge of the bag. Now we have all of the pieces and we can start assembling the bag. So just for a general idea of how it's going to look, that's the top and the bag, and we're going to sew those together with the pocket linings. So you can see how it fits together. So we'll put the pocket lining right side together with the top of the bag. And we're going to sew a seam there. And then we will, at the top of the pocket lining, sew it right side together with the bottom of the top of the bag. Now once that's sewn, you're going to fold down the top of the bottom part of the bag to the inside a little bit, and you're going to sew a decorative stitch on the outside. Once I got this far, I thought I really want a little bit of the black material at the very top of the bag, really just a sort of a piping at the top of the bag to connect it to the bottom of the bag. And because I want it to be just really a piping, I'm going to cut about an inch from the top of the bag. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces about an inch wide each. Now I decided to use the thread that matches the lining to sew the decorative stitching, and in retrospect I do not like that choice. But when I made the choice, I thought this project would be more interesting if I tried to be a little bit more bold, so that's what I chose to do. Unfortunately, I did lose some sewing footage, but you're probably tired of watching me sew anyway, so I'm going to explain what happened between the last time you saw the bag and now. So this is the other bag that I have, and it has snaps on the inside, and I wanted to use the snaps. Here's where the old bag that I took them off of. So I ripped the stitching there on each side so that I had the snaps. For the handles, I just cut off those ends that have the little metal pieces, and I wrapped it around a brass ring to attach to the sides of the bag. So I made 2 of those, and when I put the bag together, I put the lining over the bag, right sides together, and then I took these 2 pieces with the rings and put them on the sides of the bag facing down, and I also took the snap pieces and put them in the middle between the lining and the bag, right side of the snap toward the right side of the bag. And then I sewed that all together. So once it's all sewn together, the really fun part is turning it. So we're turning the lining now, and you can see the rings and the snaps, and we can push that inside, but before we do, we really need to close up the bottom, and you can hand stitch that. Just close it up and sew it together. Then what we're going to want to do is pull that lining down so that that piping at the top folds over a little bit, And then what I'm going to do is stitch along that outside stitch. So I've got it clipped together. You can see it needs to be stitched to hold it down. So I'm just going to go exactly over the old stitching using the crazy thread. Now that that's done, I have my handle piece that I made before, and I have the pieces that are attached to the bag. And we still have 2 pieces of the old straps left. So what you would want to do is adjust this to the length that you want, a length that works well for you. And then you're just going to sew those pieces. So you could make this shorter or longer. And so I've clipped it, made sure that those edges are the same length, and I'm ready to sew it. And I'm just going to sew in black 2 seams across each, just like I did for the other pieces, and there it is, all sewn together. And it is done. Well, it looks like I need to snip some threads, but it is mostly done. So if I model the final bag for you, here it is. And it works well for my height. I am a very short person. Let's do a post-mortem on the bag. So the first thing when I make another version of this, and I will, is I'm going to practice with the tension on my sewing machine more, because I didn't do a good job with the visible seams, the decorative stitching. So I would practice so that those came out looking more professional. The second thing I would do is I would change the colors in this image to match this vibrant lining. That's easy to do in Photoshop, and I should have done that instead of using colors that I like. Now, another thing that I am not too crazy about is the distance between the bag and this first gold ring here. And that would actually be very easy to fix, especially since I haven't sewn the lining together yet, so I can just open this back up, put it outside the bag, and then just rip that seam and readjust those handles if I were going to use this bag, and I'm not sure that I am. I'm not really comfortable with these outside pockets. I don't think I would want to put anything too important in there. They feel too open to me. I certainly wouldn't put a cell phone or car keys in there, maybe a granola bar that I'm not too worried about losing. I would love to know your suggestions for how this bag could be improved. Give me some tips in the comments below. I had a lot of fun making that. I hope you had fun too. If you like this content, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for stopping by today. Take care.